Rome is under the control of the empire, but the war is not over. The Ostrogothic kingdom is still strong, and it has found an ally in the Frankish kingdom. To the east, the Sasanian shah is eager to change the balance. The ties between Emperor Justinian and his best general, Belisarius, are strained. The last chapter in the Restoration of Justinian is about to begin. As the Byzantine general John and his 2,000 cavalry occupied Ariminum in March, the Goths under Vitiges had to abandon the siege of Rome. Belisarius sent 1,000 infantry and new commanders to replace John. The latter refused to obey Belisarius. Using this, the Goths besieged Ariminum. However, their failure at Rome made many Italian cities, among them Milan, more recipient to returning to imperial control. Unfortunately for Belisarius, he had to divide his forces even more in order to garrison them. Many of these small garrisons were besieged by the Goths and their allies, the Burgundians and the Franks. At the same time, a 5,000-strong Byzantine reinforcement group led by Narses arrived at Picenum. Belisarius and Narses argued as to their next move, but a letter from John stating that their supplies were low eventually made Belisarius move to Ariminum. The Romans managed to defeat a smaller Gothic force closer to Ariminum. When their fleet moved towards the city, the Goths lifted the siege. John supported Narses, so the unified command in Italy was in tatters. Despite their infighting, the Romans took several forts and towns between Ariminum and Rome between the winter of 538 and the spring of 539. The Byzantine garrison in Milan asked for urgent assistance. Belisarius ordered John to move there, but the latter refused yet again, stating that he only took his orders from Narses. The order was repeated by Narses, but a reported illness prevented John from helping in time. Milan surrendered, and one of the most prosperous cities of Italy was sacked. Belisarius requested that Justinian recall Narses, citing this incident, and the emperor obliged. With troops firmly under his control, Belisarius began to tighten the noose around the Gothic capital, Ravenna. In the spring of 539, Belisarius and his 11,000 men besieged Auximum. The Franks, led by Theudebert, invaded Italy. After they initially attacked the Goths, the Romans presumed they were coming as allies, but the Romans were also attacked soon. Fortunately for Belisarius, this Frankish army caught a severe outbreak of dysentery and was forced to return home. With no help, Auximum fell by the fall of 539. In late 539, Belisarius besieged Ravenna. Luckily for him, a fire destroyed the grain stores of the city, and the supplies sent to Ravenna were captured by his troops. As the Roman soldiers started capturing the settlements around Ravenna, the Gothic soldiers, fearing for their families, began to surrender all over northern Italy. To protect themselves from Roman persecution, the Gothic nobility, among them the king Vitiges, asked Belisarius to become the Emperor of the West. Belisarius feigned acceptance and promised not to harm the Goths. However, on the entry to the city, the Goths were taken hostage. Belisarius began packing the Gothic treasury into ships, stating that he remained loyal to Justinian, and then headed back to Constantinople in the summer of 540. Italy may have been effectively conquered, but the Gothic soldiery had not been defeated. The Sasanian shah, Khosrow, was aware of the lack of Roman troops in the east, so in the spring of 540, he broke the eternal peace and sacked the city of Sura. Many cities in Anatolia and Syria were either sacked or forced to pay tribute. the most important city of the region, Antioch, had a significant garrison, but incredibly poor planning led to its almost immediate fall. This was a disaster for Justinian. He sued for peace and sent £5,000 of gold, promising £500 more annually. However, Khosrow continued sacking Byzantine cities, and in 541 Belisarius was sent to the area. He won a minor battle outside of Nisibis, and as Khosrow was occupying the Caucasus, Belisarius managed to successfully raid into Persian lands. The garrisons in Colchis were not getting pay, so they defected to the Persians, and Khosrow took Colchis. The situation was getting worse for the Romans, as an epidemic called Justinian's Plague started in Egypt, and would eventually kill between 20% and 60% of the population of the empire. In 542, Khosrow returned to Anatolia to continue raiding, but Belisarius managed to convince the Persians that he had a much bigger army. That forced Khosrow to start his retreat. Belisarius shadowed the Sasanian forces, but they still managed to sack Callinicum. The plague reached the area, and neither general wished his army to catch it, so the campaign of 542 was short. Back in Constantinople, the plague killed tens of thousands. Justinian himself fell into a coma, but miraculously for the empire, recovered soon after and prevented a succession crisis. While Justinian was comatose, Belisarius and his generals refused to explicitly support Theodora, and for that he was stripped of his command, and his wealth was confiscated, while his household guard was divided among other generals. The Roman Empire was near the breaking point. It was suffering from a lack of funds and was surrounded by enemies on all fronts. The plague raged on, and even the reacquired lands in Italy were in bad shape, suffering from famine and crop failures. The war in Italy continued, as the Roman armies, split between 5 generals, faced the newest Gothic king, Totila. Neither side risked a major battle, as the lack of troops made them unsure of victory. The Byzantines initially held strong locations such as Rome, Ravenna, Perugia, Florentia, and Spoletium. However, the 5 distinct Roman commanders all stayed in these cities and refused to move out of them. Totila was able to quickly occupy most of the countryside, and subsequently took important cities such as Naples in 543. Belisarius was allowed to return to Italy in 544, and his presence began to stabilize the situation. However, several of his commanders, including John, refused his orders, which led to several failures. The city of Rome was exchanged several times between Totila and Belisarius. With no extensive change to the war due to a severe lack of troops and money, Belisarius left in 548, a tired man. Rome's garrison soon gave up the city to Totila in 549 due to their lack of pay, while the Franks occupied Venetia in the north. The departure of Belisarius worsened the Roman position, but soon the empire flexed its muscles. In late 550 and early 551, Justinian sent a large force of 20,000 men, with 6,000 Lombards and 4,000 Heruli and Gepids, commanded by Germanus. However, on his way to Italy, Germanus died of an illness in Salona, and Justinian replaced him with the 73-year-old commander Narses. The plan of the new commander was simple. He marched into Gothic territory and occupied a strong defensive position on an important route in the valley of the River Bonum, waiting for the Gothic attack. Totila and his 15,000 were camped to the south. Despite having a larger force, Narses offered negotiations, but Totila declined, claiming that they would meet in battle in 8 days. Narses saw through this ruse and lined up for battle at Taginae on the next day. He placed a small group in the gully on the left side to prevent being outflanked. Narses dismounted his allies and had them hold the central slope. Each wing had 4,000 Roman archers with cavalry behind them. Narses controlled the left wing of cavalry and placed 1,500 more cavalry in reserve in the centre left. The Goths generally mirrored the Romans with infantry in the centre and cavalry on the wings. Totila sent cavalry to dislodge the Romans from the ravine, but its narrowness and the terrain prevented any Gothic success. Then he further played for time by personally posturing and performing cavalry drills in front of his army, as well as sending forth a Goth to participate in single combat, which the Romans won. Totila then withdrew his armies at midday when 2,000 reinforcements of his arrived. Narses could have followed, but chose to remain in his defensive position and stayed in formation. Seeing that, Totila reformed his entire army, with cavalry in the front line in the centre, with a line of infantry behind them. Narses, seeing this massing of the Gothic forces, moved his archers further back to the wings. Totila ordered his cavalry to fight only with the lance and to charge across the entire front. The Roman archers on the wings shot a massive volley targeting the Goths, while the disciplined spearmen in the centre braced for a charge. As the Gothic cavalry began to fall back, the entire Roman line moved forwards against the cavalry. Soon the Goths were forced to retreat, and then were routed. It seems that the Gothic infantry left the field. 6,000 Goths were killed, including Totila himself. Narses then moved south, claiming Rome once more, and achieved another decisive victory at Mons Lactarius in late 552 or early 553. The last Ostrogothic king, Teia, was killed in this battle, and their rule ended. Italy had been subdued, but was not yet secure. Teia had called the Franks to aid against the Romans, and their king, Theudebald, and two Alemanni chieftains, Lotharis and Butulin, came to attack the Romans. While Narses was busy consolidating the south in the summer of 553, Lotharis and Butulin entered the Po Valley. Narses decided to winter without engaging the Frankish Alemanni forces. Fortunately for him, the enemy divided their forces, and Butulin headed for Campania, whilst Lotharis headed for Calabria. Lotharis' army was ambushed and then also hit by disease, killing many, including Lotharis, so it had effectively ceased to be an army. Narses proceeded to engage Butulin's 20,000 strong army near Capua on the Volturnus River. Butulin had built up defences for his camp, with the river on one side and dug-in wagons on the other facing the Romans. A Roman cavalry force took a portion of the wagon defences and then set fire to a defensive watchtower by the river before retreating. This was the start of the battle, as the Franks sallied from their camp and took their positions on the field. Narses and his 18,000 formed up in a traditional setup, with archer-lancer cavalry on the wings and infantry in the centre, with archers in front and spearmen behind. The Heruli had squabbled with Narses and failed to arrive in the centre in time. A few Heruli deserters incorrectly informed the Franks that their compatriots had all deserted. The Franks formed up all of their troops into a boar's head formation, similar to a hollow wedge. The boar's head charge punched almost entirely through the Roman centre. However, the Roman cavalry moved back and pivoted their formations to begin firing into the flanks of the wedge. This caused confusion in the Frankish ranks. Now the Heruli arrived to the battle in an orderly fashion and engaged the boar's head directly, causing the formation to lose its cohesion. The front portions spilled past the Heruli and routed across the river to attempt an escape, with many drowning or being caught. The Heruli pushed forward into the centre, and the cavalry moved back around the side, folding inwards. The Franks were caught on 3 sides and a portion of the rear. They were now on the back foot and were more outnumbered, without the impetus of the charge to assist them. Under this pressure, the entire Frankish force routed, and the historian Agathias claims that only 5 from the initial 20,000 Franks managed to escape. Narses' victory was total, and with it the Gothic War was brought to an end, except for a few limited cleanup operations going into 555. The war had lasted 19 years, and the prosperous urbanized Italian peninsula was now a depopulated and ruinous place. But Justinian had reclaimed Rome for the Roman Empire, so it was surely worth the price. Thank you for watching our final documentary on the Restoration of Justinian. We are planning to release more videos on Byzantine history, so subscribe and press the alarm bell to get notified. These videos are made possible by our brilliant patrons over on Patreon and our YouTube sponsors. Visit our Patreon to learn more about the perks. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.